Us on our 112th Navigating Now episode. My name's Faith Stahl. I am a consultant at Thaudium, and at least for today, I'll be your Navigating Now host. As a couple housekeeping items, as a reminder, we go live every week at 3 p.m. Central Time, and each week we're excited to bring a new guest to you to talk about really timely and relevant topics on Navigating Now. You can find, if you're interested, all of our past episodes on our LinkedIn and YouTube channels. And if you are watching live with us, really, what do you want to call out and invite people to throw out any comments and questions for us that you'd like us to answer for you today? But particular to now and what we're doing today, I'm really excited to invite Dr. Michael Kirchner on the call with us. So Mike, I've known for a few years now. He has a lot of hats that he wears, and he is, first and foremost, I'd say, a human resource development professor. He is a longtime researcher of onboarding, a veteran, more recently, a founder of Time for Development LLC. And if that wasn't enough, I'll also tack on that for the past 3, 4 years now, he's been a really great mentor to me. So, a long list of things and just really lots to learn about and from Mike, and excited to welcome him here with us today. So, Mike, thank you for joining today. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. That was a very kind introduction. Thank you, Faith.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think I can say this confidently that today we're going to be talking about a topic that is really a favorite between both of us, and that's really all things onboarding. So, really excited to be a part of that today, and really to set the context a little bit further, Mike. We're going to set out a big task in front of us to set out to start answering and defining the value of onboarding, and talk about how the impact we see when it's done well, and also at times when it's not done well, what how that can affect us and our organization, employees as a whole. I think both are equally important to know, right? What onboarding is, as well as what onboarding isn't. So I would love, though, Mike, for you to really tee us up before we get too far into the discussion of onboarding, because I know there's a lot to cover there. It's a big concept, right? Would love for you to share a little bit more insight on your background and just tell us, who is Mike Kirchner?
Sure. I've been in this arena of studying career transitions for the last 10 years or so. And it was really kind of by happenstance where I was a military veteran. I kind of shed my veteran identity for several years until I returned to graduate school. And then in my first semester of graduate school, I put together a program proposal about helping veterans transition out of
Mm,
the military. And it was kind of this enlightening moment afterwards where a classmate who I had sat next to the entire semester, we had developed a friendship. She said, Mike, I had no idea you were a veteran. I've wanted to start a student veteran organization, but I need your help.
mm,
And my initial response was, is that something veterans really care about? And, I thought about being a student veteran myself, all the other responsibilities I had. And fast forward 3 months, all of a sudden we had 50 student veterans enrolled in this organization. A lot of reasons related to the struggles they were experiencing
mm.
going through this career transition. And so for the next several years, I started exploring, well, what are those career transition challenges veterans face? And kind of surprisingly, it started to dawn on me, a lot of us go through these similar transition issues, transitioning into a new job, transitioning
Mm.
into a new industry. And so that's where I've become quite passionate about how do we as organization leaders and HR professionals do a
Mm.
better job of supporting our new hires and helping them acclimate not only into their job, but into our organization.
Yeah, it's such an interesting background to hear from you, Mike, and, like, I've known you since 2019 now. I feel like we've talked a lot about our backgrounds, how we got into onboarding. I think I've told you before, I did not anticipate as a kid to be really excited about some of the HR processes, the onboarding, what all that looks like, but it really is such a real experience, a shared experience between all of us, right? So what started with you was really, well, that veteran career transition is so difficult, and we know that it may be intuitively because that shift to maybe a more structured environment from the military workforce to the civilian jobs, that for sure is a super kind of challenging shift, right? But we really all feel it. It's just in different ways, different capacities, different degrees. So it's a really exciting shared experience we all have, and just excited to really talk more with you about it. And Mike, really interested because it is such a shared experience. It is such a fundamental experience we all go through. Um, really interested. How do you define onboarding? Because we can search the term, we can definitely define it ourselves. There's a lot of different perceptions out there, but given your expertise, given your lens, how would you define onboarding for us to set the stage for us today?
The best definition I've seen, which I've adapted, relates to this intentional process organizations use to help an outsider of the organization become an insider.
Mm,
And I think about what our traditional onboarding experience looks like. And so often it really is centered around new employee orientation, giving them
mhm,
bits and pieces of information related to, well, here's the history of us, here's our goals, here's why we're great, and here's what you're going to do in your job. And then we do this quick handoff. And
mhm.
okay, they're going to, so and so, the shift lead is going to show you how to do your job. Let us know if you have any questions. And what ends up happening is this underwhelming experience for the newcomer, where we haven't successfully devoted the time, energy, and
Mhm.
resources we need to actually help them become an insider of our organization, which I think largely
Yeah.
contributes to why turnover is so high for organizations, for employees in their first 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And it's really important. You're getting at a bit of the what should it be, and definitely what shouldn't it be. Sort of what's the lens, what's the parameters, what are the boundaries we should operate in with onboarding. And you've touched on, I think, a really important point that sometimes we may intuitively be aware of, but may miss out on, is that onboarding is really a socialization experience. Like that's what it comes down to. And so I'm really curious, Mike. You mentioned some of the maybe challenges or misconceptions we have. Can you elaborate on some of the misconceptions when it comes to onboarding? I think it's just orientation, but that's we know that's a very much different thing. Can you elaborate on some of those misperceptions or preconceived notions we might hold?
I, I think our typical approach with onboarding or new employee orientation has always been, let's get our checklist out, let's make sure we cover everything, and let's help get this employee into their position, into their job,
Mhm,
so they can be productive, so they can contribute to fulfilling the strategy that we've set forth. I don't know that we've always done a good job of structuring a holistic onboarding experience for those newcomers. Starting even
mm,
before we hire them, what are we doing as organization leaders to help them get a better understanding of what it's going to be like to work here? And then, even post hire, including all of those traditional orientation components, certainly there's a lot of value there. Certainly it's
mm.
beneficial to understand the org structure, our strategy, how we fit into that strategy. But then also, to your point, that socialization component. We think about the reasons why employees leave jobs, and we hear employees don't leave jobs, they leave their bosses. Well, at the same time, I think there's something to be said for, we don't leave jobs. We tend to stick around because we like the people we work with. And those
Yeah.
relationships we have matter.
Mhm.
And that's where that socialization component is so vital in new employee onboarding, to help make sure our employees not only feel like they're part of the team, like they are insiders, but they feel like they have the support they need to navigate any of the day-to-day challenges they're going to experience.
Yeah. So I have to play back a few things I heard because there's a lot there, and it's so important to emphasize. Part one to what I heard, Mike, essentially is that the onus isn't just on that new employee to make it happen, to be able to ramp up, to be able to make the connections, to be able to figure out how they contribute and feed into the strategy. That should be on the employers as well. The second thing, big takeaway that I heard that I would love for you to follow up on here and get your lens on, Mike, is that socialization piece. I think intuitively we talk about onboarding happening on that first day. So I started Thaudium, my current company, right, May 2nd. And to a lot of people, my onboarding, formally, and they're right to a degree, formally started May 2nd, right? But in reality, my experience, my impression, my socialization to Thaudium was really happening in April, March, when I started to learn more about them. So to you, what is sort of the timeline for onboarding? When does it start and does it ever really end?
Those are great questions. Let's talk about that socialization aspect. I think you're spot on in that while traditionally maybe we've left it up to that newcomer to take time and find time to start building those relationships, this really should be a top-down effort. We should
Mhm.
have senior leadership acting as champions to
Yeah.
helping make sure our newcomers start to build relationships. That could be as simple as establishing a formal mentorship program where
Mhm.
we have clear goals, we have clear outcomes, we have a clear structure in place for why does this exist. Maybe we're even throwing additional resources at our mentors who are acting as these support structures for our newcomers, whether it's bonuses or taking some responsibilities off their plate. There's something there that, as senior leaders, we're communicating to our workforce. It's important we're helping acclimate our newcomers into the organization.
Mhm.
To your point about when does new employee orientation or when does onboarding start? I think onboarding starts at the first interaction we have with an employer. That could be, oh, we heard a radio commercial, or we saw something on TV, or we saw a job posting about the
Yeah.
organization. I think something that's very powerful is reflecting on how quickly we as people make an impression of others, of somebody else that we meet. It only
Yeah.
takes about 7 seconds or so, and we've decided, do we like this person and do we trust them?
Mm.
There's something to be said about those first impressions. And what is the first impression we want to make with this prospective new employee
Mhm.
about what it's going to be like to work here, not only doing the job, but to be a part of our organization's culture?
Yeah, 7 seconds, that's a quick turnaround, and it holds true for we know when we first meet someone, right? We know pretty soon whether we have a good feeling, whether we wanna continue the conversation or not, but it holds true for organizations as a whole. So how can we leverage and recognize that onboarding starts from that immediate sort of connection point, whether that's a LinkedIn outreach like I had from our chief of staff, whether that's the interview that I had with our VPs, our consultants, all the way to like present day, 6 months in, onboarding's still very much happening, maybe, less formally, right? But it's going on, and so it's just an important call out to identify that how can we really think intentionally about how we onboard? And as we've talked about some of the key components in onboarding and things we want to definitely put forth in our onboarding programs, want to really ask Mike, from all of the work you've done and a lot of consulting and research and studies on onboarding, what are some of the top challenges that you see facing employers right now?
Mhm. The one that always comes up is too much information. I
Mm,
feel like I'm
yeah,
drinking from a fire hose. It's hard to believe how often
I've heard that one.
I hear that. And I think we've all been in that position. It
Yep.
points to how we typically look at new employee onboarding. It's that
Mm,
we've got all this information. A lot of it's good information, but we're sending so much to that new employee that we're overwhelmed. We don't know
mm,
what to do with it. We don't have time to process all that information. An easy fix there is, at least as a first step, take a step back and say, of all of this information, what does our new employee need to know
mm,
by the end of day one? What do we think our new employee needs to know by the end of their first week, by the end of their third week? At the end of the first day, yes, it'd be nice to know who I'm going to be reporting to. It'd be nice to be introduced to members of the immediate team I'm working
mm.
with. Is it really important that I know what was going on here 50 years ago? Probably not. It's probably not going to make a difference in how I feel as an employee.
Mm,
At some point, it might be valuable. At some point, it's worth having that conversation. But I think that's a perfect example of segregating out and breaking down what is the information we actually need to share today versus in the weeks ahead.
yeah, it's
Another,
such a great point. So go ahead. That's such a great point that I want a parking lot for us. Go ahead.
I think one that relates to it is the lack of intent
Mhm.
behind onboarding. We hear a lot about, oh, I was trained poorly, or I didn't receive any training, or when I showed up, they assigned me to somebody who was only in the job for a week. We see that a lot in
Mm,
manufacturing type jobs, where
yeah.
because turnover can be so high, and because uh, a lot of manufacturing organizations are so structured in terms of who needs to be on the
Mhm.
line, who needs to be productive on the line, and who might be available. What we run into there is that tension where now I suddenly, as a newcomer, feel like I'm an inconvenience. I don't really feel like I was welcomed as maybe I had hoped I would be into this job. And then I don't know what that endpoint looks like. How do I know when I've successfully completed my training to do the job? Or how do I know when I've
Mm,
successfully become an insider into the organization? I think these are some pretty significant challenges we
yeah.
face in employee onboarding, but also present some unique opportunities that we can break down those gaps.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and those are just some of the challenges that, I think we've all heard in the L&D space, and so they're very pervasive, and one thing that I wanted to call out to your response, Mike, in particular, is that emphasis on putting yourselves in the new hire shoes and asking, "What do I actually need to know, and how do I feel about it?" So, am I gonna get super excited about my role, and is it gonna benefit me in the next week, 2 weeks where I'm super stressed, right, trying to get acclimated and ramp up and, be productive? How am I gonna feel hearing about 50 years ago how things operated or some of the content that's not gonna benefit me right now, really asking what are those key things they need to know? Because that fire hose of information, you're already just throwing so much at you that the top 3 things, what are those top 3 things I need to know day to day, week to week? I think is such an important call out. And Mike, I wanna actually shift to a question that we have from one of our viewers actually, Todd Southern, who you might know. So you can see maybe on the screen here, he says, I have observed a gap in socialization between those that started, sorry, it's hit, between those that started online. How can we develop a sense of presence for new hires in virtual workspaces? So COVID has certainly impacted this, accelerated this need, this importance. What's your response to that?
This is an awesome question, and one I've had a number of times in the last couple of years with scholars as we see this mass migration to hybrid work or entirely remote work.
Mhm.
I don't have the right answer to this.
Mhm.
What I can say is I think we can still use a mode of building in intentional time to build out those relationships, to force time as part of that onboarding experience where we have a virtual coffee hour, or
Yeah.
we have a virtual lunch together, and we start to get to know one another. uh, One of the discussions I've also had with colleagues comes back to, even for employees who are working virtually, organizations would benefit if they make it a mandate that as part of your first week, you have to come on site
Mm.
to meet your direct supervisor, to spend time with them, to meet the IT staff you might be working with, to meet other key players who you might end up having to depend on or might be working with over time. Now, I see the flaw there, especially if most of our workforce is working from home.
Mm.
Bringing everybody to headquarters every time we have a new employee on site, brought onto the organization, is going to be a challenge. This is a question that we as researchers are interested in and looking at
Mm.
right now is what can organizations do to help with that socialization aspect for remote employees. I anticipate Todd is getting at exactly what I think I understand what Todd is getting at as it relates to what's the likelihood of us retaining employees and making it and helping
Mm.
employees feel like they have a connection to the organization when they don't have those robust relationships and connections with their coworkers. I think it's a
Yeah.
great question.
Yeah, there's sadly no silver bullet, no magic wand for it, but it's definitely one of those things that's top of mind because I think like Mike, I don't know if you know where I am, but I'm in Chicago at Thaudium and I'm, mostly remote. So when I come in, maybe it's once a month, a little bit of variation to it, but it makes such a difference to the connection we feel and the connection we have with our team members. I can be on 8 hours of Zoom calls a day with my teammates and people who work with me, but it doesn't meet the 1 hour of lunch we go out to get when I'm in
Mhm.
office, right? So it's definitely a big question. It's a fair question. It's one that continuing to work on in our virtual world that is just a necessity now, given the circumstances. So really great question, and one of those big challenges to operate through. I am curious, Mike. We think about onboarding, how I think everyone has good intent with onboarding. We want it to go well because there's a lot in it for us as an organization, us as employees. So there is a lot of importance placed on it. So I'm curious from your perspective, Mike, we have a good intent, but what prevents us from actually doing onboarding well?
We look at our day-to-day responsibilities and how many of us as a primary responsibility in our day-to-day is it to onboard employees, is it
Mhm.
to socialize employees. And so structurally, even from a job design perspective, we don't build that out as a core
Mm.
responsibility beyond orient the new employee, get
Mm.
through that checklist, and especially as HR professionals who are generally the ones who are responsible for this, we're often wearing 15 different hats.
Yeah.
We look at the great resignation here and the amount of HR professionals I speak with, I anticipate you hear the same thing, who are just exhausted from screening job applications
Mm.
and from going through the hiring process. But that's what has to get done. At the same time, we're continuing to try to figure out how are we going to navigate this new environment? What our
Mm.
workplace looks like now that a portion of our workforce is working from home or is allowed to work in sort of a hybrid format. Even thinking about the rest of us who are outside of HR, but when are just trying to do
Yeah.
our jobs,
Mm.
we don't have it built it into our job description that we have to devote time to acclimate the newcomer and
Mm.
to start building those relationships. And
Yeah.
it can be quite challenging to dedicate that time when we look at the emails continuing to pile in or those other responsibilities that are piling up over the course of a day or week when that newcomer starts. So I
Mm.
really think it's a structural issue
Mm.
and an area that we as organization leaders haven't invested heavily enough in as compared to some of those other HR functions that we see.
Yeah, such a great point. We think about the limited resources we operate with. We think of cost, we think of time, we think of the additional responsibility it brings on. Whenever we add to our workforce, it's not always going to be immediate return. There's going to be that time to ramp up. There's going to be that time where tenured employees are definitely having to maybe take on some more of the load to really support the new hire, and that's typically not considered as it probably should in a lot of our job descriptions, right? So there definitely are barriers to great onboarding to acknowledge, and I think that we've been sort of indirectly covering it, but want to get super explicit on why onboarding is so important to get right. And so would be curious, Mike, What exactly would you say is the business case for that you would make for getting onboarding right? So we think about the cost, we think about the challenges, but I think we would probably both argue that we can't afford to not get onboarding right.
The top challenge that comes up over and over and over with organizations over the last couple of years relates to retaining our workforce.
Mm,
We can't find employees, and we can't retain them. They keep leaving. We know just from a cost basis how expensive it is to replace an employee who's left. The highest turnover rates are those employees who leave within the first 3 to 6 months. And so, simply from a cost basis perspective, if we do a better job of investing in a robust onboarding experience, not just going through our quick checklist,
mm,
not just, oh, here's Ted in IT, give them a call if you have a computer issue, and let's continue on with our tour. If we actually take time to get to know Ted, maybe we have a half hour coffee with them,
mm,
or we go out to lunch. Those are some things that help us actually feel like we're becoming a part of the organization. We have colleagues who really feel like colleagues
mm.
and people who could become our friends, as opposed to,
Yeah.
oh, I met 15 or 25 different people. We had our morning meeting. They called me up. Hi, this is Mike. Everybody wave and say hi, Mike. And we got 50 people saying hi, Mike, and then we move on.
Yeah.
There's nothing going on there. It's essentially a waste of time, of everyone's time.
Mm,
As a new employee, I don't necessarily feel like I'm acclimating by any means. And the
mm,
rest of those 50 employees have no idea who I am yet. By
mm.
being intentional and taking just a little bit more time to invest in those newcomers, we're going to be much more likely to retain them. The one additional thing I would like to share relates to realistic job previews.
Yeah.
If we think about our experiences with interviews and when we first get started, how
Mm,
often do we hear about how amazing the organization is and how much fun it is to work here? And really, just all the great things about being an employee for our organization.
yeah.
I think we've all been there where a family member or a close friend, they accept a new job and they're so excited. This is the dream I've always wanted. This is the opportunity. In 6 months,
Mhm.
they said I'm going to be promoted into this role, and we're excited for them. We do a check in 3 months later. It's not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
It's not what I thought it was going to be.
Mm,
Almost never do we see that same level of excitement. I think that points to a significant challenge we have as organization leaders and HR professionals. In are
mm.
we providing an accurate portrayal of what it's going to be like to work here? Just because we disclose what some of the challenges are or the concerns are of current employees doesn't mean it's a bad place to work. But what we're
Right.
doing there is being authentic about, yes, there's a lot of great things, but there's also some challenges or frustrations
Mm,
you might need to figure out and work through. The reason I like offering realistic job previews is because it gives us as organization leaders and as those HR professionals an opportunity to be proactive. Yes,
mm.
we recognize these are challenges, but here's at least something or some things we're doing as an organization to try to minimize or alleviate those challenges. Or here's what other employees are doing or have done to minimize the impact of those challenges. There's something very
Yeah.
authentic
Mm,
to sharing that information with a newcomer, and suddenly I feel like I'm also valued and respected. And so even though I might not like everything I hear, I at least have a better understanding of what I'm getting into. And at the end of the day, if that prospective employee says this isn't right for me, well, we saved ourselves thousands thousands of
yeah.
dollars, if not well over $10,000, by just stopping it right there instead of forcing something, instead of trying to fit a square into a circle, when at the end of the day, it's just not going to work anyway.
The idea of realistic job preview, I know we've talked a lot about this before, and I think it's such an important point to bring up because it seems uncomfortable when we go into an interview as maybe the interviewer to share, well, here are some of the hardships we're facing. But it's such an important way to make sure that we're leveling the playing field and we're actually doing ourselves a favor too when we share those hardships because they're not going to go away, right? They're going to be
Mhm.
very present. They're going to be something that people feel and see a week, 2 weeks into the job. And it really does us all a service when we lay it all out there because it's going to then allow people to self-select out that maybe aren't a good fit. And that's totally fine because we want to be able to be able to get the right people in place and we want to equally be happy with that relationship going forward. So I think it's such a good call out and I think it feels really uncomfortable to do, but it makes such a difference in the relationship. And to your point about the cost of onboarding and how the business case, how we make it to, if a CFO is sitting in front of us right now, we can't afford to make bad decisions when it comes to onboarding because I think we've seen this stat before, Mike. It's like 3,000 to 18,000 on average. That might even be the low point for some positions. 3 to 18K cost when we do onboarding poorly per employee because of that loss. So how do we start to address some of those big costs? Well, we be proactive about it. And I think it's such a good call out about the realistic job preview. Um, I have to ask Mike, though, in one of our final questions before we get to the lightning round, what if you had a magic wand, if you had a silver bullet, what would be one takeaway that you would want to leave us all with going forward when it comes to onboarding that you should try to put in practice? What's that one big takeaway people should leave with?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I made a hard question for
I,
the last one, so yeah,
yeah,
had to
you
save it.
tricked me here. You tricked me here.
I did. I did. Sorry.
Here's here, here's the best advice I have when it comes to new employee onboarding. Instead of doing it how we normally do from the organization's perspective, here's
Mm,
what we want you to know about our organization, about your job. If you're going to become a member here, try to structure employee onboarding from that newcomer's perspective.
mm,
What would they like to hear? What would they like to know? What would they like their onboarding experience to be? So at the end of that first day or at the end of that first week, they're not going home feeling deflated or lost or frustrated. They're actually going home feeling inspired. They're still
mm.
feeling excited about their job. And they feel like they're starting to develop some meaningful relationships where they can see themselves becoming a longer term member of that organization.
Mm. It's a great answer. I saved the hardest one for last, but I think it's a good response. And I think, if there's nothing else to take away, it's just how can we be more intentional is really what I'm hearing. Just really put ourselves in their shoes. And that's gonna cover a lot of bases for us. Such a simple thing, but really not enough of us do it, I think, because it does take that intentionality behind it. And we don't always have the time to do so. But it's gonna save us in the long run. So, Mike, I warned you that there will be a lightning round, and I want it to be on the record that I did ask if you wanted to be prepped what the questions will be, and you said absolutely not. We're just going to go with it. So I tried to warn you. So I don't think they're too hard, but are you ready for the lightning round questions? No right or wrong answers, just quick responses.
I did
Ready?
appreciate you making the offer, but I didn't
Yeah,
want to cheat. So let me have a sip of coffee here, and
yeah.
let's hear the first
Get
question.
ready. Yeah.
All right, let's roll.
All right. First question: what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now?
I'm generally terrible with most of this stuff. I have been getting more interested in strategic planning again, and
Hmm.
frankly, the failures we see with strategic planning. So I've been referencing back to a couple different strategic planning books, really pointing to those next steps and what organization leaders need to do to better help us move forward with those strategic plans.
Hmm.
Watching. We just
And you
finished
can
The
that's
Watcher.
bonus points if you wanna do all of them. You only have to select one if you want to, one of those options, but go ahead and share what you're watching.
All right, because I'm probably going to fail the rest of the questions. I'll get one extra bonus point. On Netflix, we just finished watching The Watcher.
Mm.
It was, I don't know, some house that was haunted or something out in I don't know, Connecticut or Maryland, but yeah, I
Would
don't
you
know,
recommend?
messes with your brain. Yeah, it teases with you a little bit. It draws
Okay.
you in.
Good. Okay, good to know. Maybe that'll be on my next watch list. Second question for you. We all of a sudden have an extra hour in the day. So we're 25 hours a day now. What are you doing to fill that extra hour?
My immediate response, because I have to give a response, is getting the work I couldn't do done in 24 hours. Try to get that extra
Yep.
hour in. Though the older I get, the more of an advocate I become for mental health and physical health, blocking off time to take care of ourselves, to
Mm,
remember we can only control what we can control, and if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to struggle to take care of others.
yeah, really good answer. Last one that I have for you. If the world were more like me, it would be blank.
I'm a big fan of effective leaders, and the attribute I have come back to over and over and over the last few years is the importance of humility.
Mm,
Whether it comes down to making sound decisions for our organization, whether it's about understanding our people, the challenges they're facing, not pointing blame at others, taking
mhm.
responsibility for our own failures. I think the world would be a better place if we were all a bit more humble.
That's a great one to end it on. All right. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, especially about onboarding. So thank you so much for your insights. Thanks for joining
Thank
us.
you, Faith. I enjoyed the conversation.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Want to say that next week will be the one exception to our regular tuning in on Thursdays. So want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and we'll be back the following week. See you all then. Maybe not.